Hey everyone, welcome to Endpoint Security Management in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. I'm Lance Crandall, I'm a program manager. And Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Matt Call. I'm a program manager on the policy and security team.
All right, well, we have three main topics that we're going to discuss today. First, we're going to talk about the foundations of zero trust and why that's really critical for your organization. And we'll talk about some of the pillars of that. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is compliance and conditional access and how that plays a really big role in helping you have that and implement that zero trust strategy. The last thing is we'll talk about unified endpoint security and how that's really critical on bridging the gap between your SecOps team as well as your IT admin team to really make sure your devices are secure as they're accessing your company resources. So with that, let's dive in. Let's do an introduction to zero trust first of all, just so we're all on the same page. So if you think about it in the past, a lot of companies, as they were trying to think about how they protect their data, it really was based around the network perimeter. And if something was inside that perimeter, then you were safe. And as we know, the world's changed. We have workers that are working from anywhere. They're accessing resources from coffee shops or from their homes. We have SaaS-based applications. There's been a wide proliferation of that. So really all of your data and resources are not protected behind that. And in fact, probably they never were. If we really think about it, there's been plenty of breaches that have been in the news over the last few years around data that's been breached even when it was behind that network perimeter. So there needs to be like a new approach now to how we approach data security and protection. And so that's where zero trust really comes into play. And so the concepts behind zero trust really go around verify explicitly and use least privilege so you can prevent lateral movement. And then lastly is always just assuming breach. If we always have that mindset about assuming breach, we're going to have a different security mindset than we may have in the past if we just assume a piece of software like a perimeter is protecting all of that. And so there's three different pillars to this foundation for zero trust. The first one is around strong authentication. So it's really important that devices that are connecting to resources are both known and compliant devices. And then second, we want to make sure that the user identities that are accessing these resources are strongly authenticated. The next piece is really around adaptive access. And so it's coming up with policies around conditional access to ensure that as the situation of that user changes or that device changes, that the policy adapts as it's accessing a specific app or a resource. And then lastly, pulling this all together is unified endpoint security and management of these endpoints, and really making sure that we can configure these devices in a secure way, as well as make sure that we are monitoring threats and detecting those threats and being able to quickly remediate those threats. So those are kind of the three pillars of a zero trust story. So as we dive into each of these pillars in a little bit more detail, the first area is really around strong authentication, and that's really made up of two pieces. The first piece is around ensuring that the device is a known device, as I mentioned before, and it's compliant with your security policies. That's really critical. The next piece is around that strong authentication for user identity that we talked about. And this really comes in the form of like getting away from kind of passwords and moving more towards like a passwordless type of a model where we're looking at things like biometrics, hardware-backed security keys like FIDO2 keys, and looking at things like Authenticator and other methods like that to be able to ensure that those devices are really secure. And lastly, it's really important to have multi-factor authentication. Just turning on multi-factor authentication in your org can really help you prevent a lot of the breaches that occur on a regular basis that we continue to see in the news. The next piece is really around adaptive access, and this really ties into conditional access and compliance as well. And so there's a lot of factors that go into adaptive access and these policies that take place on every single attempt that you're verifying the user as they're trying to authenticate to a resource and access a resource. So this goes around things like being able to make sure that they may need multi-factor authentication if I'm in a different location than I'm used to. So I may have a set of known IP addresses for my corporation and maybe have a different security policy or set of security policies when I'm there. Maybe there's a strong identity risk that we've detected, and so maybe I want to force that multi-factor authentication there. And so really being able to ensure that the devices are compliant, that I have different conditions based on maybe location or other things like that to grant that access, and I'm validating those attempts every single time that we are accessing a resource is really what adaptive access is all about. And the last thing that, again, kind of pulls this all together is unified endpoint security and management. And what this does is it bridges the gap between IT and SecOps to be able to configure devices in a secure manner, as well as be able to monitor and detect threats, and then be able to quickly mitigate those threats to reduce the risk of those devices in your organization as they're attempting to access that critical and sensitive information in your organization. So those three areas are really the critical pieces when it comes to configuring and determining a zero trust strategy in your organization. So now what I want to do is dive a little bit deeper into conditional access and compliance and really talk about how that's important for zero trust and some of the new things that we're doing with compliance to extend that in your organization. So many of you are probably familiar with conditional access, but really this is kind of like the linchpin of your zero trust strategy. And so if you look on the left of this slide, you'll see that there's a lot of security signals that get fed into the conditional access engine that helps to gate access to those resources. So the first thing is that if we look at it, Azure Active Directory is the biggest identity system in the world, and it is constantly getting billions of authentications per day. And with that, we can have machine learning that helps to detect risk. And a common one that we always say is, the impossible travel scenario. So if I have someone that is in the US and they're authenticating, and then I have that exact same person that's authenticating from, say, Africa or some other country that's obviously way far away, within maybe a few minutes or a certain amount of time, we know that's kind of an impossible travel situation. So now we flag that identity as being a high-risk sign-in. And then we can have different controls that happen beyond that to be able to determine if we want to block access or allow access in that scenario. The next thing is really around device risk, and the device risk side of things is really about ensuring that we have compliance policies that we've set in Intune that are associated with that device. And as we look at that, really what's happening there is we are saying, hey, as detecting the state of that device from a security perspective, taking those signals and then determining an all-up compliant state for that device. So it could be things like, is BitLocker enabled on that device? Is there a complex password? Is the firewall enabled, et cetera? And it depends on the platform, but there's many compliance policies that you can set for device risk. The next piece is really around partnerships that we have, as well as first-party solutions around detecting the risk of that device. And so while setting a security policy on a device is great, we also need to have the ability to proactively and in real time detect if there's a threat on that device, report that up, determine what the risk level is, and then have a compliance and conditional access policy that acts on that. And so we have many partners that you can see here on the slide. We also have Defender for Endpoint that also does a great job of getting those threats detected on a device, go into that risk score, and feed it into the controls. So after you've set up the controls, which could be things like determining which IP range you're in, we talked about that scenario earlier, or even enforcing which applications can access the data on the back end. That's super critical because we want to make sure that the apps that are accessing it are conditional access aware and that they also have data loss protection policies. And that's super critical to make sure the data is not lost once it's accessed on your network. After that, we have different controls that we'll have that will either grant access, they'll block access, or even enforce MFA. So you could say, hey, this is a risky sign-in. Let's just do an additional security check to make sure that this user is actually who they say they are. And MFA can help you to get there. So based on those access policies that you have, then that allows that. The last part is that you want to be able to associate these with the different apps that you have. That could be Azure Active Directory apps, it could be Office 365, it could also be line of business apps that you have. And so with this, you have a holistic solution that provides adaptive access to your on-premises apps and resources using conditional access and Intune device compliance. Jumping to the next section, we've talked about how device compliance is really critical in evaluating risk in your organization so that you can adaptively grant access to those resources as part of your zero trust strategy. And so with that, we wanted to talk about some things that we've done to expand the compliance story and give you even more signals that you can get to ensure that those devices that are accessing your network and accessing your data are really known and compliant devices with your security policy. So the first thing that we want to talk about is how Intune marks compliance in Azure Active Directory for devices. So if a device is enrolled in Intune, first what it will do is it will detect the security policies that you have based on that compliance policy you've set in Intune, and then it will report that status back to Intune. Intune then has a compliance engine that will take all those signals that it got from the device and merge those into a compliant state. So that's compliant or not compliant. And then it marks the Azure Active Directory device as compliant or not compliant. Now, we know that there are customers that are utilizing third-party MDMs as well, and we want to make sure that those devices are protected as they access resources as well. So what we've done is we've partnered with various third-party MDMs that you can see here on the list, and what we've done here is we've also given them access, the ability to utilize and basically get the compliance from their device, send that to their cloud system, and then also send that compliant state to Intune. Then Intune will evaluate the overall compliance and then mark the Azure Active Directory device is compliant or not as well. So now you not only have signals from Intune managed devices, but you can also have those compliant signals for devices that are managed by other MDMs as well. So the next thing that I wanted to announce is that we have been looking at the ability to provide additional compliance values for Windows devices. So we know that Windows is a very extensible and open platform. So you can write scripts, you could have the registry, there's WMI queries that you can run. There's all sorts of different ways that you can access data on that device. We have quite a few different compliance policy settings that are just native to Intune that you can set, but we know that there's different things that customers want to be able to set on their own as well. That could be that they want to detect the presence of an application, or they want to have, in the example that we're showing here, they want to be able to check a firmware version on the device or a BIOS version. We know that often one of the security threats that exists on a device that doesn't get patched as regularly as it should is like the BIOS. So if the BIOS is out of date, there could definitely be a security issue there. And we don't have a specific policy right now that actually detects that. So what you could do is you can write your own script with custom compliance that will allow you to query the BIOS to determine the version, and then you write a JSON file that will report back what that state is and what the compliance value is. And then if that device is not compliant, you can also have customized remediation messages that the end user will see. And in this case, you can see that the BIOS needs to be up to date and informs the user on how to do that. And you 100% control that messaging. You can even localize it into other languages if you want. And then all of those data, those custom compliance values that were detected by your script will get reported back to Intune. And then they'll go through that same compliance engine, take in all the other values that we support, like say BitLocker or the complex password, et cetera. And then it'll turn that into the compliant state and then mark that device as compliant or not based on the policies, and then conditional access kicks in. And so custom compliance we're really excited about. This is something that is coming to public preview very soon, so stay tuned. The next piece that we're really excited to talk about and expand compliance into is Linux. And so Linux kind of comes into play in organizations when they have a lot of developers. So developers often will use Linux workstations, and those workstations need to be able to access, things like Teams or other Office 365 applications. So it's critical that that doesn't become a security hole in your organization just due to a business need of needing to have Linux for those developers or other users in your organization. And so what we're doing is we are adding the ability to enroll that device to Intune so it becomes a known device, and then we are also adding compliance policies for Linux specifically that you can now set that will gate access to those Office 365 or other resources to make sure that they're compliant before they can access that. And so a couple of the key ones that we're setting here is that we want to require a minimum OS version. So for example, Linux gets updated very frequently. The distros that we are supporting are Ubuntu and Red Hat, because those are the common ones that are in enterprises. And so you can set a minimum version there. You can also require encryption, which is another critical one, as well as enforcing password strength as well. And so those are the three that we're starting out with there from a compliance perspective, but those are really important to help protect your data in your organization. So this is also coming out in preview very soon, so please stay tuned for that one as well. So we've talked a lot about device compliance in general and how we set those different policies and how they're evaluated, and some of the things that we're doing to expand into other areas of compliance like Linux and custom compliance as well, to give you more control and more signals in your organization as you protect data as part of your zero trust strategy. The other piece that's really important though is gating access and controlling access to your network. And so what we've done is we've partnered with some key network providers, network access providers such as VPN providers as well as Wi-Fi providers. And you can see the list here as well for the ones that we partnered with. But the story here is that as you have a device that is accessing, say VPN for example, that VPN gateway has partnered with Intune and will make a call out to Intune to determine the compliant state of that device. And so if that device is now not compliant, instead of allowing access, it's going to completely block access to your on-premises network through that VPN gateway so that you have that protection. Same with Wi-Fi. If you're trying to access an on-premises Wi-Fi and the device isn't compliant, then that gateway is going to reach out to Intune to get that compliant state and then ensure that the device is compliant before it gives you access. So it's just another way that you're able to have those zero trust principles of validating the device is compliant before you grant access. So we're really excited to have these partners on board as well to help you protect your network. So along those lines, you may be aware that we recently released a first-party VPN solution called Microsoft Tunnel. So the current scope of that is iOS and Android devices. And just similar to what I mentioned on the previous slide, we wanted to have a better together story as we started to build this with security. And so one of the key parts that we talked about earlier is really around ensuring that the device risk level of that device is acceptable. So it's not a high risk device as it's trying to access some resource that you may have. And so what we did is we actually combined Tunnel with the Defender for Endpoint application. And so now that they're part of the same single application, you get anti-phishing and malware and threat detection in that same application, which feeds into that risk level. And then that you also get connectivity through Tunnel back to your on-premises network. And so this is a really critical solution that we've come up with that really enhances the security and connectivity story in your organization for those iOS and Android devices you may have managed by Intune. And so the compliance and conditional access story just continues to go forward with network access with these types of solutions. So the last thing I'm going to talk about before I hand this over to Matt is the Defender for Endpoint risk score. So I briefly mentioned that on the previous slide, and as we talked about zero trust principles, about how managing the device risk is really, really important to your zero trust story. And so what happens with Defender for Endpoint is that on that device, it's going to detect the threats that may exist, and then based on those threats, it will determine and aggregate those into a specific risk level. In Intune, you can now set a compliance policy that says, hey, I only want to allow devices that are medium risk or lower in my organization. If it's a high risk device, now that becomes a non-compliant device. And so we're getting real-time feeds from the Defender for Endpoint client where those threats are aggregated, and then we can utilize those for compliance and conditional access to gate access to resources. So it's just really critical to have these features across platforms as you look at that story. So the part that I wanted to announce here as well is that we support this on iOS, Android, and Windows, but we are also adding support for this on Mac, and that's another preview that's coming soon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who's going to talk to us more about unifying endpoint security and why that's really important in your organization. So Matt?
Yeah, every time I think about risk score, I'm pretty involved with the Windows risk score scenarios and features that we have. I always think about how a device can report risk to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, right? And then that risk is determined in the cloud from our friends in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, sent to Intune, and then resource access through the conditional access chain and Azure AD is revoked in a matter of minutes typically. I mean, that's just amazing, like the way that we think about that and the way that risk can play into securing your resources so quickly, right? Because otherwise we're required to detect and then respond to these threats. Using risk score brings an automated approach to that allows you to protect your resources very quickly, which is always awesome. So, and I love Mac too, so it's great to see it coming for Mac. What I want to talk about a little bit is not just the security, not just the compliance security story. When we talk about zero trust, we always discuss how we're going to manage the compliance and access to resources. But just as important as managing access to resources is managing device configuration. If you look at the slide that's on the screen, you'll see it broken up into sort of two main buckets or two main horizontals as they're displayed. You'll see on the top that we'll see things that we normally associate with security configurations, right? Antivirus policy, disk encryption policy, firewall, endpoint detection response, which is an entire industry of products. Now, on the bottom, you'll see things that only Microsoft does better, in my opinion, and I may be biased, but attack surface reduction, securing the identity, making sure that we're using strong authentications like Windows Hello for Business, and then making sure that you're browsing the web safely and making sure that we're validating the reputation of sites with our web protection and network protection stacks that are internal to Microsoft Defender. Now, all of these things are great, and I think in the past we've gotten feedback that it can get sort of complicated though, right? If you take the number of different settings and configurations that we need to manage, you start looking at all the platforms we need to manage those on, Windows clients, Mac OS, on servers, on mobile devices, the configurations can really add up quickly. And a big premise of Zero Trust is making sure that we protect our devices in a secure, consistent manner, but those diversity of products, those diversity of configuration planes, they can really cause concern for some organizations. So we've been focusing for the last bit of time on making sure that we can bring those things together into a single surface to manage, deploy, and audit your security configurations. In the past, you've had multiple avenues to manage these security configurations. You've had Intune for your cloud devices. You've had Configuration Manager for your on-prem devices. You've had group policy where neither of those things would apply. And if you couldn't do one of those three things, maybe you went to registry, maybe you went to third-party management tooling, maybe you went somewhere else. But remember that diversity of planes, that diversity of management surfaces can create problems and consistency. Now I need to change one setting in multiple places. It can get out of hand quickly, and it starts to counteract some of the benefits of zero trust. So for us, we've been looking at handling this a few different ways. Our first and foremost priority is to make sure that we're bringing IT and security teams together. With Microsoft, we really see the benefit when security and IT work together. Traditionally, they've been in separate silos. Traditionally, they've had their own sets of tooling. And a key foundation of zero trust is integration across the stack. So making sure that IT professionals can see the configurations and deployments and tools that are being used by our security professionals. Being able to make sure that those two tool sets, whether that's a security tool that's managing security configurations or different responses to threats, gets context and awareness from the management tools that are available inside the enterprise. Making sure that they're informing each other, not just, I'm seeing these things in my management tool and I have to go digging in a different, we got to get away from that sort of concept to make sure these things work together, to make sure that no matter what the tool is, no matter the team using it, making sure that I can get contextual information from that tool set when I'm responding to a threat or managing a security configuration. So less friction, more teams working together, that's really what we're going for. We want to simplify the security management strategy, and we're going to do that in a very simple fashion, specifically for our Defender customers. For our Defender for Endpoint customers, they're going to have a simple choice now. The choice will be, if I use Endpoint Manager, I deploy my security configurations through one of the arms of Endpoint Manager. They already exist today. They're in production capacity. They're out in the wild, either through Intune, Configuration Manager, or through both using co-management. But if I'm not using Configuration Manager, we're creating a new scenario that allows you to use Microsoft Defender for Endpoint to enforce my security configurations without requiring enrollment to one of the Endpoint Manager tool sets. So let's walk through how that works real quickly. So if I think about what we have today, and it's represented on the slide that's here, I have on the left-hand side my Intune or my Cloud Manage or Cloud-born device scenarios, right? You'll see I have cloud-only PCs. You'll see that I have co-managed devices that are in Intune and Configuration Manager with those workloads granularly managed. And then I have my cross-platform scenarios, iOS, Android, Mac OS there, to allow me to configure all of those in a single surface. We went a little bit further and we brought Configuration Manager into the mix. We know that some Configuration Manager customers can't just cloud attach every device or can't just cloud manage every device that's in their enterprise. So we created a scenario where by tenant attaching the infrastructure, we can go ahead and deliver those security configurations from the cloud. That unlocks the ability to bring Windows Server into the same management surface and allows me to deploy things like antivirus, EDR, firewall policy, as well as some new attack surface reduction policies, and in the future firewall rules, down to devices without needing to have those devices enrolled in Intune, which is monumental. It's groundbreaking. The next thing that we want to do here is we want to start making this available for our Microsoft Defender for Endpoint customers. So what we'll do is we'll build a new scenario where Microsoft Defender for Endpoint will start receiving policy directly from the same Endpoint Manager console. This brings any device with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint into the single management surface that is Endpoint Manager, no longer requiring you to complete device enrollment to get that security configuration down to the device, allowing you to take a single antivirus policy, a single firewall policy, and deploy that to devices that are in Intune or through co-management, also to the MDE devices, right? And that's going to be pivotal. This year, we'll introduce support for Windows Server 2012 R2 and Windows 10 and later on this platform, with plans to expand that in the future to Linux and Mac OS. All of this means that if you have devices in your enterprise that aren't managed by Configuration Manager, aren't managed by Intune, and you need to control and secure those devices with the security configurations and endpoint security, you can just deploy those configurations to the devices without requiring any further enrollment. That makes the security management choice easy, and that really breaks us into two sort of scenarios. Again, I either have Endpoint Manager on the device or I don't. That's the management choice now. No more choosing between group policy, no more choosing between writing registry keys. If it's in Endpoint Manager, I use the existing technology that's currently in place to manage and deploy those settings, either through Intune, through Configuration Manager, or through co-management. Now, with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint coming to the table, we're able to deploy those security configurations directly to those devices without requiring enrollment. If for any reason those devices become enrolled in Configuration Manager in the future, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint will seamlessly hand off security configuration management to those devices without any admin action required. Conversely, if Microsoft Endpoint Manager is there initially and then is removed for whatever reason, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint will pick up the slack and start deploying security configurations to that device to make sure that the security configurations on the device are what I intend for my enterprise and to make sure that the devices are secure. All this will be done through the Microsoft Endpoint Manager endpoint security interface, which is an area that we've built specifically for security admins to tailor the user experiences and workflows directly to their needs and wants. In there, you'll see antivirus, disk encryption, EDR, all the workload-based configurations that admins are used to without all the noise of the other 10,000 settings that are in Intune for Windows. Lastly, I just want to wrap up here with a brief summary. Zero Trust is critical to data protection. Intune compliance, we're extending it. We're adding more controls, more knobs, expanding our platform support. And then managing security configurations for Defender for Endpoint devices is just going to be easy. Everything will happen easily through the Endpoint Security Console as your single surface for security management. Lance, any final thoughts from you before we hand it off here?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Matt. I just wanted to indicate, as we talk throughout the different sections here, we did mention there's quite a few previews coming soon, so please stay tuned for those previews of the different features that we've talked about here, and I really appreciate you all tuning in.